Hey there, welcome to another episode of Daniel Talks Code. If you've been following along my series on adding automated tests to our To-Dos app, this is the third tutorial, and today we're going to be focusing on adding some tests to the DAO, the Data Access Object, which is an interface we create to facilitate interactions with the database. And this is a common pattern when using the Room library on Android. When writing unit tests for the database, Google recommends using what's called an in-memory database and executing these tests on a real Android device. So to get started, we're going to open up our apps build.gradle file, and then we're going to add another section here that's going to be for instrumented tests. And we're going to declare these using Android test implementation instead of test implementation. So basically, we're going to need these 5 dependencies. The first one being the Kotlin Coroutines Test library, which is going to be added in the last tutorial here for our local tests, but now we need it here inside of our for our instrumented tests. We're also going to need this Android X test library, which is going to give us this run with Android JUnit 4 class, which we're going to need to annotate our test class with. We're also going to be testing LiveData methods from our DAO. These are suspend functions that populate the value of the live data inside of our view model. So we're going to need this ArchCore testing dependency for live data. We're also going to use the truth assertion library, which will make it a lot more readable to write our assertions. And then we're also going to need this Espresso Core library for to get the Android JUnit 4 runner. Okay, and also don't forget to sync your Gradle file. All right, so now we're going to add our first test inside of this Android test directory. So we're going to create a new Kotlin class file, and I'm going to call it To-Dos DAO test. And we're going to annotate this with run with Android JUnit 4 class. Now, as I said, we're going to be dealing with live data. So the first thing we're going to need is to create an instant task executor rule so that we execute all of our live data tasks synchronously and in order. So we're going to say val int task executor rule. So we annotated it with @getRule, and we're also going to need to add 2 more variables, one for our test DAO and one for our test database. Next, we want to create a setup function that is going to execute before each of our test methods. So we will begin by annotating it with @before. And this function is going to be responsible for setting up our database and our DAO. We'll begin by creating a reference to our context, our application context. So we'll use our application provider, get application context, and then now we can set up our database. So test database. And here we can use our in-memory database builder. So we pass the context we created earlier. And we need to let it know which class it needs to build. So for the database, we're going to say the To-Dos database. And here, first we're going to allow main thread queries. And then we're going to call build. Now notice that for testing and only for the purposes of testing, we're allowing queries to the database to happen on the main thread using this allow main thread queries. This is because queries to the database usually happen asynchronously, and we also have a couple of live data properties that are being updated using the values from those queries. So then to simplify our tests and to make sure that the data we need in the test is available when we need it, when we're about to make the assertions, then we allow the queries to happen on the main thread. And here we can instantiate our test DAO as well. We also want to make sure that we close our database using a method that will run after each test. So here we're going to write @after. And we'll just say close database. And we'll call test database close. So now we can begin writing our tests using what's called camel snake case. And the pattern that we normally want to use when naming tests is the system under test followed by the result that we want. And then after that, followed by the action that we took to get that result. So let's start with our test annotation. And this test can throw an exception, so we're going to mark it as throws. Exception. And then here we're going to test the database. And here we're going to assert that the database returns a size of 1 as well as the correct title when we insert a new to-do item. So returns size of 1 and correct title when new to-do inserted. Now, because we're working with coroutines, we're going to use the run test method. And inside here, we can create a new to-do item. And we're going to insert that into the database, so we can call test DAO insert the new to do. So first I'll show you the long way of writing this test using what's called an observer. And then we'll go over Google's recommended solution, which involves a new utility class to avoid writing boilerplate code. Because we're working with live data, if you remember when we go to our to-dos view model, we can get all of our to-do items using this get all function. And this actually returns, if we command click into this returns a live data list. So because we're working with live data, we need to observe the value of this live data within our test. So to do that, we need to create an observer. So we'll create an observer here of type observer. This observer is going to be of type list of to-dos, same type of the live data that we're observing. Here inside of this block, we can make our assertions. So first we're going to say assert that it, which is the list of to-do items. We're going to assert that the size of the list is equal to 1 because we inserted this to-do item. And then we can assert also that the title of the first item in the list is equal to this buy chocolate chip cookies. So we can say that the new to do title is equal to the title of the first item that we inserted. So here we can call test DAO. We can get all of the to-do list items. We can observe forever with our observer. we need to also get all, remove the observer. We have to remember to remove the observer at the end. Okay, so now let's run our test. Great, and we can see that here it passes. So now I'll show you the Google's recommended solution, which adds a new utility function to avoid all of this observer boilerplate code. Having to create observers every time if you're observing multiple properties can get a little tedious. So Google has provided us with a simple utility function that we can add to our test directory and then call within our tests to make things a bit simpler. So let's go ahead and add that here now. So inside of our Android test directory, we're going to create a new Kotlin class file. It's going to be just a file. We're going to call it LiveData Test util. Hit enter, and then here we'll paste our extension function. So this utility function simply observes the live data that we call it on until it gets a value. And if it already has a value, then it just returns that immediately. So here in our test, rather than creating this observer, we can get rid of that. And then here we insert a new to-do list item. Whoops. And here we can get a reference to the list of to-do items. So we can just call our test.dow get all. And then now we can call get or await value. And then here we can write our first assertion. So we can assert that the size of our list is 1 because we inserted a new to-do list item. And then now let's just assert that the title of the item that we inserted is this buy chocolate chip cookies, which is what we expect. So here we assert that the first item inside of this to-dos list, the title of that item is equal to this new to-do title of the item that we inserted. We can run our test here, and everything passes exactly the same way. So now we can go ahead and add 2 more tests for the other methods inside of our DAO. So we want to do one for update, one for delete, and we're already getting querying. So actually we can update this test here so that instead of doing a get all, we can just get that to-do item with, since we have the ID. So here, instead of getting all of the to-dos, we can say, let's say insert a to-do. So we can call get and then give it this ID. And then so that should get us the to-do that we inserted, retrieving it directly from the database. So here we can replace this to-dos with inserted. We don't need this first. And we of course have to call get or await value so that we get the actual to-do and not the live data. So this will give us the value that we're expecting. And then so we have inserted to-do. We assert that the title of that to-do we inserted is equal to the new to-do title. So now let's write a test for updating the to-do, a to-do item. This test also can throw an exception. So we're testing the database. So I'll just name this database returns correct data when to-do updated. I'm going to call the same run test since we're still working with coroutines. And so I'm going to create a new to-do list item to insert into the database. Okay, so we're going to be buying peanut butter cookies. So let's insert that to-do item into our database. Now let's go ahead and make some updates to the item. So let's say we change our mind and we want to buy ice cream instead. So we're going to update the title of the new to-do item. And I'm also going to go ahead and mark it as completed because I bought ice cream earlier today. And now we can call the test.DAO update method with this new updated to-do. And now we can assert that that to-do with that ID has the correct data that we updated. So we can say we can get that particular to-do item, and we can get or await value. And I'm just going to get a reference to this and store it into a new variable. And now we can make assertions on this variable. So we can say assert that the updated to-do title is equal to ice cream. And we can also assert that the updated to-do completed property is true because we changed that to true here. So we can run that test. Make sure that it's working correctly. Awesome. Cool. Let's add one more test for deleting to-do items from our database. So I'm going to go ahead and add another test function. And this can also throw an exception. We're going to say the database returns. So the database returns 0 when all to-dos are deleted. We're going to also call run test. And here we can insert a new to-do item. Okay, so we started with no to-dos in our database. We inserted a new to-do item, and now we're going to query we're going to delete this item from our database. So we're going to delete, and this takes an actual to-do item. So we're just going to pass in that same new to-do. So once we delete that from the database, we need to check that the size of the database is 0. So first, let's get a reference to the live data list from the database. So the number of to-dos that we have in our database. So we're going to say the to-dos that we get from the database using the test.DAO get all. And then we're going to call get or await value. And then assert that to-dos size is equal to 0. So now if we run this test, we should have it pass. Sweet. All right, so that is 3 tests that are checking all of the different methods from our to-dos DAO, our data access object from our database. So we call insert, update, delete. We are also calling get and get all within our tests. So here we have our get, and we also have our get all. Great. So hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Please let me know in the comments if you have any feedback or any ideas for other tutorials that you would like to see. Thank you so much for watching. Take care.